At Balmoral, life has always been full of strict rules and traditions that sound almost unbelievable in the modern world. Every morning, maids had to bow and curtsy to rooms, even if no one was inside. If a royal had just left, they still bowed to the empty space, as if the presence of royalty lingered in the air. This tradition has lasted for more than 150 years without ever being changed. But this was only the beginning of what life was like behind the castle walls. For example, vacuum cleaners were banned because the Queen disliked the sound of them. Instead, workers scrubbed carpets on their knees with brushes, sometimes spending hours just to clean one hallway. Some staff worked up to 18 hours a day, often earning less than the national minimum wage. Speaking freely was forbidden. Unless a royal spoke to them first, staff had to stay completely silent. Many later described the management as toxic, and some even said they discovered things so dark that dozens of workers quit their jobs overnight. The estate itself has a story that goes back to 1852, when Prince Albert quietly purchased Balmoral for $32,000 after seeing a rain-soaked advertisement. He didn't even tell Queen Victoria at first. That sum would be worth around $4.4 million today. Within just a few years, the old house was torn down, and by 1856 a new granite castle stood proudly on the land. Prince Albert personally sketched details like the clock tower. Over time, the estate grew larger and larger until it covered more than 53,000 acres, an area bigger than Paris or San Francisco. The grounds held mountains, around 150 buildings, their own power supply, and even a secret 3-mile railway line built in 1866 just to carry royal luggage. Despite how much it feels like part of Britain, Balmoral isn't public property, it is privately owned by the royal family. That means that money made from hunting, renting cottages, or selling deer stays with them, not the state. Some members of Parliament complained about this, but King Edward VII famously called it their inescapable refuge and refused to change anything. The castle itself looked like something from a fairy tale, with thick white granite that sparkled against the green hills. Prince Albert was deeply involved in every detail. He wanted windows designed to let in the perfect amount of fresh air. He had carvings made of all 9 of his children above the entrance and created narrow hallways so family members would run into each other more often, believing it would keep them close. The clock tower, inspired by German castles, rang in the soft key of E-flat so it wouldn't frighten the ponies. While some critics mocked the design as a giant cold barn, the style caught on, and within 20 years most new Scottish country homes copied Balmoral's look. To Queen Victoria, the place smelled like pine and freedom. When the royal family stayed at Balmoral, they never came alone. During hunting season, around 150 workers were needed to keep everything running, gillies to manage the hunts, cooks, cleaners, stable hands, and even one man whose only job was to play the bagpipes under the king's window at 7 every morning. Everyone had to sign a lifelong vow of silence. Breaking it meant immediate dismissal. Daily life for staff was exhausting. Maids sometimes worked 18 hours a day, polishing hundreds of silver pieces and keeping more than 50 fireplaces burning. Each winter, they went through 60 tons of birchwood. Royal meals could be surprisingly simple, such as picnics by the river, where the king himself sometimes washed the dishes. But strict rules were never relaxed. Many staff had to live on the grounds and even help with the culling of deer, roughly 1 out of every 200 killed each winter. Running Balmoral cost around $3 million a year in wages, mostly paid for through timber sales and tourist cottage rentals. One of the strangest traditions was the annual Gillies Ball, which began in 1858 and still happens each September. It was one of the few times workers and royals mingled socially. The event began at 7 in the evening, with the king leading the first dance with a member of staff. Even a dishwasher might share a dance with a prince. Prince Philip was said to spike the punch with gin to loosen people up. Princess Diana once described it as a mix of a prom and Downton Abbey. But even during the ball, rules applied. Invitations revealed a person's rank, gold edges for higher staff and plain for others. At midnight, the royals left, and everyone bowed in silence. In 1991, a young footman was fired for selling details of a barefoot dance to a newspaper. Since then, cameras were banned. Still, workers looked forward to the night, because it was the only time they were allowed to call the king by his first name. Balmoral's isolated location made it an ideal place to hide royal secrets. Queen Victoria's close friendship with her servant John Brown grew here, away from watchful eyes. King Edward VIII practiced his abdication speech here before giving it to the world. In 1997, when Princess Diana died, William and Harry were kept at Balmoral and shielded from the devastating news for hours. Even so, not everything could be hidden forever. In 2019, a cleaner leaked photos of the royal children's treehouse, which led the palace to ban photography altogether and even cover windows. In earlier years, another worker sold private details about the Queen Mother's drinking habits and Prince Andrew's obsession with golf balls. Though he was paid $90,000, the palace sued him. Now, drones are blocked by security fences in the skies. Balmoral may be quiet, but secrets still find a way to slip out. For young staff, the days were long and brutal. At 6 in the morning, maids went to the oldest kitchen and polished over 200 silver items before breakfast was served at 8. After that came long treks down stone hallways carrying kettles of tea while trying not to wake the royal dogs. Lunch preparation included peeling 18 kilos of potatoes. At 4, it was time for tea service, followed by cleaning muddy boots from hunts. By the time they reached their tiny attic bedrooms, it was usually close to 10 at night. 15-hour shifts were the norm, and there was no overtime pay. In the staff manual, a simple line explained it all: loyalty is its own reward. One maid later said it felt like giving your life to a shadow, because no one ever said thank you. Vacuum cleaners remained banned for years, meaning carpets had to be cleaned with small horsehair brushes. It could take 45 minutes just to brush one hallway. Dust built up so quickly that maids had to rinse their aprons twice a day. In 1990, the head housekeeper admitted this added 9 extra hours of work daily. Staff suffered aching wrists and painful hands but were still expected to keep going. Talking was dangerous. In 1986, one maid overheard a private exchange between Prince Charles and Princess Diana while dusting. The next day, she received a written warning. Workers were ordered never to acknowledge royal conversations. Breaking this rule twice meant immediate dismissal and losing the $250 end-of-season bonus. Many staff developed secret hand signals just to communicate silently. One described the halls of Balmoral as quieter than a library, not out of respect, but fear. Everyone knew that silence meant survival. The pay was poor compared to the work. In 1983, a junior maid earned about $18,000 before taxes, only a few thousand more than the average British worker, despite working 60 hours a week and living full-time at the castle. Some parts of the estate still had old-fashioned toilets, forcing maids to empty chamber pots. It took 3 years of service to be promoted, but even then pay only rose a few $1,000s. Male workers like gamekeepers earned much more, creating silent tension that was never discussed. One rule especially shocked newcomers: if a royal had just left a room, staff still had to curtsy when they entered. It was seen as honoring the spirit of royalty that lingered there. At one Gillies Ball, staff had to curtsy to empty rooms 61 times in one night. Some bruised their knees so badly they needed bandages. Many said it felt like bowing to ghosts, a tradition that valued dignity less than ceremony. In 1988, a French magazine published a story based on a maid who had only worked at Balmoral for 8 weeks. She was paid more than $10,000 for her account, far more than she would have earned in years. Her stories revealed dinner routines, private details, and even where Princess Anne's dogs slept. The British tabloids quickly picked it up, and millions read details the palace had wanted to remain secret. One touching story she shared was about a guest who accidentally drank from the finger bowl, mistaking rose-scented water for soup. To save him from embarrassment, the Queen and the entire family copied him, sipping the water until 17 bowls sat empty. It showed their kindness in private moments. But she also shared less flattering details, like how Margaret Thatcher was supposedly housed in a remote cottage instead of the castle during a visit, which tabloids turned into stories of rivalry. About Charles and Diana, she described them as young and in love, holding hands and quietly helping staff. Yet the truth remained that housemaids were earning just $75 a week, with late pay and break bells that rang like in the 1800s. The palace was furious, calling it a gross breach of trust. Security tightened. Workers now faced long background checks and had to sign secrecy agreements tied to the Official Secrets Act. Talk to the press, and your career was over. Even so, memories of the Queen remained mixed. Some staff recalled her saving wrapping paper at Christmas and storing it in a dog treat tin, showing her wartime frugality. Others noticed she saved lemon slices for use the next day. To some, this was charming. To others, frustrating when they were underpaid. Prince Philip, meanwhile, treated dinners as a sort of quiz game, firing off questions to staff about the day's events. Diana, still new to the family, found it intimidating, feeling more like a test than casual conversation. By 1991, even William and Harry were involved in playful mischief, hiding vacuums and squirting mustard on ceilings, copying their grandfather's old pranks. But under the laughter was tension. Just days before, Charles and Diana had quietly discussed separating. The boys played, but the castle seemed to hold its breath. For staff, the rules were relentless. On arrival, they were made to swear an oath to protect royal secrets, often standing beneath stag heads in dim halls. By the late 1980s, secrecy clauses were formalized in contracts. Even though the Queen personally thanked workers by name after big events, nothing could soften the freezing attic rooms where they slept, sometimes as cold as 4 degrees. Until 1994, hot water only ran for half an hour each morning. During storms, broken fuses meant drying sheets over stoves with gloved hands. Only after a 1995 audit did conditions improve slightly, with new plumbing and duvets provided. The outward beauty of Balmoral often hid the silent suffering of those who kept it running. Behind every polished piece of silver and every grand tradition were long hours, low pay, strict rules, and a heavy silence. For some, it was an honor to serve in such a historic place. For others, it felt like living in a shadow, where even the simple act of speaking could cost you everything. The maid always liked to think her words had played some part in the changes that slowly came to Balmoral, but the truth was much bigger than her. Strange things had always happened behind the thick granite walls of Balmoral Castle and across the royal estates, though not the kind of scandals splashed across tabloid covers. These were quieter, deeper stories of life behind closed doors, of workers stretched to their limits, of secrets carried like heavy shadows. Between early 2024 and the summer of 2025, cracks that had long been hidden beneath polished surfaces began to split wide open. At King Charles's Highgrove estate, the gardening team collapsed almost overnight. Out of a dozen workers, only one remained. From the outside, it looked like a dream job: immaculate hedges, carefully themed flower beds, and tours for thousands of visitors. But behind that beauty, the truth was far harsher. The gardeners sweated under 60-hour work weeks across 15 acres, keeping it perfect for 40,000 visitors each year. For all that work, they earned just around $22,000 a year, which worked out to about $7.50 an hour after tax, barely scraping above minimum wage. The breaking point came on July 5, 2025, when one gardener injured his shoulder hauling nearly 200 kilos of compost by himself. Instead of fair treatment, he was pushed onto basic state benefits, just £116 a week. Within days, the rest of the team had walked out together. Emails leaked soon after revealed that Charles often left handwritten notes in sharp black ink demanding the impossible: remove every weed overnight, or replant 700 flowers in 3 days before his return. On July 18, the palace admitted there was a problem. A crisis team was brought in quietly, but the damage was already clear. These struggles weren't new. The same kinds of hardships echoed across decades. In January 1983, Fiona, a young maid, remembered sleeping in freezing attic rooms at Balmoral. The thin glass windows did nothing against the icy winds. At night, their breath froze into white patterns on the walls. Heaters were banned because managers called them a fire risk. The staff were promised warmth by 1990, but nothing changed. By the late 1980s, a third of the maids had already quit. A university project in 1998 revealed more misery: rain dripping through broken slate roofs, damp uniforms clinging to cold skin, and illnesses like pneumonia that ended not in compassion but in dismissal. Only in 1992 did the palace finally install electric heaters after government warnings, but by then the loyal workers who had endured years of pain were already gone. Jump forward to March 2024, when a housekeeper posted an online review calling Balmoral's management toxic. She described supervisors yelling at maids in front of guests, punishing them for missing a speck of dust, even docking their short breaks as punishment. Within a week, 5 maids quit, leaving rooms uncleaned until late at night while bosses locked themselves in their offices. The pay, she wrote, was just £10.90 an hour, less than the UK's real living wage. Overtime beyond 48 hours wasn't paid. Other former staff backed her story in replies, confirming what everyone already suspected. The palace tried to downplay it, but leaked interviews later showed that nearly 70% of staff who left said they quit because of bullying or disrespect. Even speaking out was dangerous. Since the 1950s, royal employees had been forced to sign lifelong secrecy agreements. Updated again in 2022, they meant workers could never reveal what they saw or experienced. Breaking them could mean being sued for hundreds of thousands. But in October 2024, someone leaked payroll files anonymously, and the numbers were shocking. A senior royal aide earned $146,000 a year, while a maid earned just $19,500 and had to share a room. The pay gap was more than 7 times. Meanwhile, the sovereign grant, the taxpayer money funding the royal family, had risen to $85.9 million, up 41% in 10 years. Maids' wages, by comparison, had barely climbed 6%. This wasn't the first betrayal of secrets. In 1950, Marion Crawford, who had been governess to young Princess Elizabeth and Princess Margaret, wrote a gentle memoir about their childhood. She described the girls swimming in public pools and queuing for the underground like ordinary children. For this, she was cast out. The Queen Mother never spoke to her again, her royal cottage was taken away, and she died in 1988 under a false name. Not a single royal came to her funeral. Decades later, Paul Burrell, Princess Diana's closest servant, released a memoir in 2003. Diana had once called him the only man she could trust. His book revealed private arguments and letters from Balmoral, but even before that, in 2002, police raided his home and found over 300 royal items. In a surprising twist, the Queen herself intervened, saying she had spoken to him about them. The case collapsed, and Burrell was cleared. His book sold over 500,000 copies, though he later admitted adding false details to confuse investigators. In January 2024, after Princess Kate underwent surgery, a different kind of breach shocked the public. Someone at the London clinic tried to access her private medical records. When the news broke in March, the clinic warned staff they could face criminal charges. 3 workers were investigated, and fines could reach £17.5 million. Many saw it as the most serious breach of royal privacy since the phone hacking scandals of the early 2000s. But the pattern of workers speaking out went even further back. In 1983, Stephen Barry, who had joined royal service at just 17 and soon became Prince Charles's valet, published a book called In Royal Service. He revealed that valets earned just $6,000 a year, half of what a London bus driver made even though they were on call day and night. Barry was fired within months, and tragically died in 1986 of AIDS-related complications. His honesty, though, exposed the quiet class divide inside Balmoral's walls. Even those who got permission to publish stirred controversy. Angela Kelly, the Queen's dresser, released her book The Other Side of the Coin in 2019 with the monarch's blessing. It shared light-hearted stories, like how she broke in the Queen's shoes herself or used dish soap to fasten a brooch. Still, palace insiders said Charles disapproved of her photographs, proof that even with permission, writing about life inside was never safe. Then, on August 4, 2025, something extraordinary happened. At 7:30 in the morning, Balmoral's massive gates were locked shut. Officially, it was because of Storm Flores, with winds reaching 90 miles per hour. But the real reason was simpler and more troubling. Nearly 2/3 of the room attendants had walked out the night before, refusing to sleep on damp floors in huts with collapsing roofs. Thousands of tourists were turned away. It was the first time Balmoral had been closed to the public since the 2001 foot-and-mouth crisis. By midday, rain was already leaking through the old castle windows. Only 2 housekeepers remained, holding the line as best they could. The truth was that conditions had been deteriorating for years. In 2024, maids began posting online about being asked to clean 12 royal suites before lunch, some of them filled with fragile antiques and historic tartan mirrors that had to shine without a speck of dust. One maid said if Queen Camilla's room wasn't finished in 55 minutes, she'd lose her lunch break. The pay was still just £10.90 an hour. Many walked away, taking jobs at hotels where the work was easier and the wages higher. Even Queen Victoria had once complained in her diaries in 1865 that she was always short on housemaids. Some things, it seemed, never changed. Meanwhile, King Charles pursued his vision of sustainability. Between 2023 and 2025, he expanded Balmoral's organic gardens and added 30 beehives, dreaming of every royal meal being carbon neutral. But the dream fell hardest on the shoulders of the gardeners. They were forbidden to use tractors, forced to haul everything by hand. Rainwater barrels replaced hoses, meaning endless trips with heavy buckets. On average, a gardener made 90 wheelbarrow trips each day. Since 2022, almost every senior gardener across the estates had quit, their bodies giving out under the strain. One said lifting over 200 kilos of compost daily had given him carpal tunnel syndrome. Charles's handwritten orders to remove all chemicals by sunrise were pinned to the shed walls like commands from another world. Investigations later found staff were being paid just £11.05 an hour, 15% below the national average for hospitality jobs. Whistleblowers said it was because of a budget rule that capped staff wages at 7% of estate earnings. But after Queen Elizabeth's death, tourism revenue had jumped by 22%. Experts estimated it would cost only $187,000 a year to raise wages fairly, a fraction of what was spent resurfacing the private helipad. Instead, workers kept leaving. In 2024 and 2025, the turnover rate hit 38%, double the industry average. The breaking point came in June 2023 with a young maid known only as Heather Glenn. She revealed online that her request for emergency leave to be with her mother during surgery had been denied. She was told instead to stay and starch Princess Kate's linens. She quit on the spot and shared screenshots proving she had only used 2 of her 10 leave days that year. Her story went viral, drawing over 11,000 comments. Within 2 weeks, a job ad appeared online for a room attendant, offering £10.50 an hour and immediate start. The palace claimed it was coincidence, but insiders said 5 more maids resigned soon after. In desperation, managers began hiring temporary workers from Aberdeen, paying them $19 an hour, almost double what the loyal maids had been earning. It was a bitter irony, proof that money had always been there, but never for the ones who needed it most.